Y'all need a pilot? No, Mark, I need a better movie. Flight Risk genuinely made me mad when I was walking out of the theater, and it takes a lot to make me mad after I watch a movie. For reference, I wasn't mad when I walked out of Madam Web, Craven, or heck, even Borderlands for that instant. But this movie just takes the cake. So I am saying a lot when I say this movie genuinely makes me angry just from how bad it was. So please bear with me as I try not to crash out while I review this movie. But before we get started, as always, if you're new here, my name is Erin and I talk all things movies and TV, but really mostly movies. So if you're into that type of thing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me. That would be greatly appreciated on my end. But without further ado, let's sadly, unfortunately, talk about the movie that is, because trust me, it is a movie. Whether it should be or not, that's up in the air, but it is a movie. It exists. Let's talk about Flight Risk. So this movie follows a U.S. Marshal played by Michelle Dockery, and she is tasked with transporting a witness who is played by Topher Grace on a small plane so he can eventually testify. But the pilot of this plane, who is of course played by Mark Wahlberg, isn't who he says he is. Jumping right into the good, and the only thing I have here is when the credits rolled and I got to leave the theater. Yeah. Anyways, all jokes aside, I try to find good in every movie I watch, no matter how bad it is. I believe there is a little bit of good in each movie, but man, this one made it tough. And honestly, I would be lying to you if I sat here and told you that I found good in this movie or I thought there was something good about this movie. So I'm just not gonna do that because I couldn't really find any good in this movie. And again, that is just my opinion. There's probably people out there that really enjoyed this movie, and that's completely fine. But for me, not much worked in this movie, and there wasn't a lot of good, if I'm being honest. So let's just move right on to the so-so. The first thing I have for the so-so is Mark Wahlberg. He at least tried to buy in and really give his role his all. He was over the top this entire movie and had a really funny accent for part of it as well, but hey, I can appreciate his dedication. The script did not help him at all. It felt like he was repeating the same couple of lines in this movie, just in different ways throughout this thing, and on top of that, he really didn't have much screen time in this either. Once they figured out who he was, they fought him and then locked him up in the back of the plane, and then he just didn't do very much after that. Every now and then he would figure out a way to escape and then fight them again just to get locked up again in the back of the plane, and that was pretty much his whole existence in this movie. Considering this thing used him a lot to advertise and get butts in seats for this thing, that was just a weird choice in my opinion to not really have him in the movie as much as you would expect him to be. And on a side note, he actually shaved his head for this movie, and that's something I didn't know until after I went and saw this thing. I just thought it was some type of wig that he had on for this, but no, he actually went and shaved that middle top part of his head, which is another level of dedication after seeing how this movie turned out. But I will say the bald head was pretty distracting. I mean, my whole theater busted out laughing when they revealed it, so I guess the more I think about it, there was good in this movie. It was Mark Wahlberg's bald head being revealed, because that was the highlight of my experience with this film. Moving on to the bad, and the first thing I have here is just about everything else in this movie, but I will break it up as I usually do, so let's talk about the plot first. For me, this plot really had no direction, and a lot of the decisions they made just didn't make that much sense in my opinion. I mean, when they first locked up Mark Wahlberg in the back of the plane, we spent a considerable amount of time with our other two main characters trying to figure out how they're going to fly this plane and how they're ultimately going to get this thing on the ground. And we spent all that time just for the US Marshal to be like, oh, I have this sat phone that we can use and call someone for help. And I'm just like, why didn't we start with that? Why do we just waste all of this time trying to figure out how to fly this plane, figure out how we're gonna get this thing on the ground when you had a sat phone this entire time? So next time, just start with the sat phone. And then there was these other moments which probably annoyed me the most, where Mark Wahlberg's character was trying to escape from being handcuffed to the back of the plane, and he was not being quiet by any means. It didn't even seem like he was trying to be quiet at some points, and I was just like, yo, other two characters, US Marshal and prisoner. You can't hear him back there trying to escape and eventually try to kill you guys. Like, I get that we are on a plane and it's loud up there, but like, come on. They also could have just killed him, because once they started using the sat phone to get help, they really didn't need his help to fly the plane anymore, because they were being given those instructions over the phone. But I guess they had to keep him alive, because otherwise we just wouldn't have a movie. It was just dumb moments like that that made you shake your head while you were watching this thing. I mean, essentially this entire movie consisted of Michelle Dockery and Topher Grace's character talking on the sat phone to characters who are off screen that would essentially explain the plot to you, and then they would fight Mark Wahlberg a couple of times in between those phone calls. This was supposed to be a suspenseful thriller, but I can honestly say there wasn't one suspenseful moment in this entire movie. Next up for the bad is the dialogue, and if I had to describe this dialogue, I would say it was like nails on a chalkboard, and that is not an exaggeration. It was just one of those things where something would happen and then they would proceed to explain to you what just happened, and I was just like, hey, you don't need to tell me what happened. I literally just sat here and watched what happened, so it's okay to just show me and not tell me sometimes. The dialogue was pretty flat throughout this entire film, and I know the actors probably did the best they could with what they had, but the delivery of those lines wasn't the best either, in my opinion. But anyways, overall, the dialogue just made it feel like there was no sense of urgency or suspense in this movie, which is weird because this is a movie that is supposed to have lots of urgency and lots of suspense. And finally, for the bad, I have the humor, and this humor just felt so weird and out of place for this movie. A lot of it was essentially Topher Grace's character doing his best impersonation of Spider-Man's humor, which is ironic because he did play Venom back in the Sam Raimi trilogy. He was just a very jokey and whiny character in this thing, especially in the first half of the movie, because in that first half, it felt like he was trying to crack a joke like every other line, and none of them landed. Now look, I like Topher Grace, but his character's personality just really didn't fit this thing, in my opinion, and felt really out of place. Mark Wahlberg had his fair share of jokes and humor as well that increasingly got more weird and creepy as this movie goes on, but after a while, when zero of the jokes are landing, it just kind of got annoying to me. And with this movie trying to take itself seriously for the most part, the humor just didn't match the tone, in my opinion. Now look, I'm not trying to be mean about this, but overall, this was just not a good movie, like at all. It has an interesting premise, but has no real suspense, and will just leave you rolling your eyes both during and after you watch it. So yes, you can 100% skip this movie. Those are my thoughts on Flight Risk. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments, and as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shopeasyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.